No one in Lancaster County could remember a brighter, crisper October morning than the one that dawned over the Pennsylvania Equestrian Arena.
It wasn't an accident.
Dew glittered on the
I
grass.
was there.
Banners snapped
Project
in the cool
Ashmore.
breeze. And a
Robert.
current of anticipation ran through the crowd. All eyes were on Charlotte Morgan, the youngest finalist ever in the Tri-State Invitational, riding a coal-black gelding whose calm power made him seem carved from the mountain itself. Winston was his name, and he had become both her anchor and her last link to her father. Charlotte, 16 and wiry, with stubborn freckles and a gaze sharper than most grown men's, adjusted her gloves and flexed her fingers. She glanced once at her mother, Dr. Karen Morgan, sitting tense in the front row, lips pressed thin. Karen was never quite comfortable around the spotlight, and Charlotte could feel her mother's worry across the arena like static. Beneath Charlotte, Winston shifted, sensing the electricity in the air. She leaned down, whispered, "You and me, buddy, just like Dad taught us." The loudspeaker crackled. "Next up, Charlotte Morgan riding Winston!" The stands erupted. A flush crept up Charlotte's neck, but she set her jaw, heels down, eyes fixed on the first jump. She couldn't afford to let nerves win. Not today. She and Winston moved as one, his hooves pounding the turf, muscles rippling. The crowd's roar faded into a hum. There was only her heartbeat and Winston's breathing. Fence after fence they soared, flawless, until the last, a towering oxer, painted a garish red. Charlotte felt Winston hesitate, a ripple of doubt running up through the reins. "Go," she urged silently, legs tight. Winston leapt, higher than ever. For a split second, they flew. Then, disaster. Winston's back hoof clipped the rail, the bar clattered. Winston landed awkwardly, stumbling. Charlotte's balance wavered. She fought to stay upright, but gravity yanked her from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, air punched from her lungs. For a moment, the world spun. Shouts, gasps, someone's scream. She lay dazed, tasting blood, the arena sky tilting above her. Through the pain, she heard chaos, officials running, Karen's frantic voice. But it was Winston who brought silence. Instead of bolting or shying away, the black horse wheeled, trotted back, and knelt beside Charlotte. He lowered his great head, nostrils flaring, and nudged her shoulder. Gentle, insistent. The crowd, breath held, watched as Charlotte reached up with a trembling hand and gripped Winston's mane. Cameras flashed. The judge's whistle blew, but no one moved. In that moment, horse and girl were alone in the arena, bound by something fierce and wordless. Charlotte blinked back tears. "It's okay, boy," she managed, voice barely a whisper. Winston stayed by her side until paramedics arrived. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, she caught one last look at her mother's face, pale, stricken, guilt and fear mingling in her eyes. The crowd erupted in applause, but Charlotte heard nothing. Winston's dark eyes, wide and worried, were the only thing steady in her spinning world. Hours later, under the bright hospital lights, Charlotte's body ached, but the pain in her heart was sharper. Her father should have been there. He'd died the year before. Everyone said it was an accident, but the hole it left was too deep, too sudden. Now, her mother hovered by the bed, fussing, trying to keep busy. "You could have been killed, Charlotte." Karen's voice shook. Charlotte cut her off. "I'm fine, Mom. Winston saved me." Her mother's hands trembled. "He's just a horse." "No, he's not." Charlotte's words were ice. "He's all I have left of Dad." A brittle silence filled the room. In the hallway, Charlotte heard nurses murmuring about the miracle horse who refused to leave the ambulance bay, stamping and nickering until someone brought him a blanket. Reporters crowded the entrance. Charlotte closed her eyes, wanting to shut it all out. That night, sleep wouldn't come. She replayed the fall again and again. The split second Winston faltered, the certainty that something had spooked him, the way he returned for her, kneeling like he knew what she needed. She remembered her father's words, spoken 1,000 times in the barn at dusk. Horses remember more than we think, Char. They carry us, but sometimes we have to carry them. The next morning, Charlotte left the hospital against her mother's wishes. She limped through the fog to the stables, reporters trailing at a distance, questions swirling about the bond between girl and horse. Inside, Winston waited, head over the stall door. When Charlotte approached, he whickered, pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm sorry, buddy. I let you down." Winston snorted as if to say, "Not you." Charlotte stroked his neck, heart aching with longing. For her father, for answers, for a way to go back and change what happened. A photographer caught the scene, the light framing horse and girl in gold. By evening, their story was everywhere. Fallen champion's miracle horse. A bond beyond words. Strangers sent letters. Charlotte felt exposed, raw, like her pain was public property now. But in the quiet between visits, she heard Winston's slow breathing, felt his warmth beside her, and knew she wasn't alone. What neither of them understood was that their real journey, the one that would test every secret and scar, had only just begun. Charlotte spent most of the next week at home, moving slowly, her body still battered from the fall. Her mother fussed with her schoolwork, her schedule, her medicine, anything but the ache that wouldn't leave Charlotte's chest. But Charlotte's mind was somewhere else entirely, stuck on that terrible electric moment. Winston's panic, the crowd's collective gasp, the way her father had always told her there was more to riding than just winning. The newspapers wouldn't stop calling, wanting interviews, asking for a photo op with Winston. The world seemed fascinated by the miracle horse. But Charlotte felt a prickling sense of unease. What had happened in that arena didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like a warning. Winston was different now. Jumpier, eyes darting at shadows, only calming down when Charlotte sat quietly by his stall, humming old lullabies her father used to sing. It was one of those nights, rain tapping softly at her window, when Charlotte's world shifted again. She wandered into her father's old study, a room her mother kept locked except for rare occasions. This time, something made her linger. The old wooden desk, covered in dust, looked just as he'd left it. Neat rows of books, faded photographs, his battered leather journal tucked underneath a pile of bills. Charlotte's heart hammered in her chest as she reached for the journal. The cover was warm, familiar, smelling faintly of hay and tobacco. She tried the brass clasp. Locked. Frustration bubbled up. Of course, her father would leave behind another mystery, another riddle. She rifled through the drawers, fingers shaking. That's when she found a loose piece of paper tucked into the side, her father's spiky handwriting, almost impossible to decipher. Ashmore, Winston, project. Not just training. If anything happens, look for the key. Charlotte's skin prickled. Project Ashmore? What did her father mean, not just training? And why was Winston's name scrawled in the margins over and over, circled, underlined, as if it meant everything and nothing all at once? The next day, Charlotte slipped the journal into her backpack before heading out to the barn. The world outside felt washed clean from the rain, the air sharp and fresh. As she approached Winston's stall, she saw Lucas Avery waiting by the fence, kicking at a pebble, hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets. Lucas was new in town, all rough edges and a quiet confidence that both annoyed and intrigued Charlotte. He nodded at her, then at the journal she tried to hide behind her back. "Found something?" he asked, eyes glinting. Charlotte hesitated, then shrugged. "Just some of Dad's old stuff. He was always scribbling down nonsense." Lucas smirked. "Guess you're not the only one with secrets." She almost laughed, but then Winston let out a sharp, unexpected whinny, a sound she'd never heard before, high and almost fearful. Lucas jumped. Charlotte dropped her bag and ran to the stall. Winston was pacing in frantic circles, eyes rolling white, sweat darkening his flanks. Charlotte climbed over the door and pressed herself close to his side, hands out, murmuring, "Easy, boy. It's just me. I'm here." To her shock, Winston froze. His breathing slowed, and he pressed his muzzle into her chest, trembling. For a moment, she saw something in his eyes. Recognition, fear, pain. It was almost human. Lucas watched, wide-eyed. "That's not normal. Charlotte, what's wrong with him?" Charlotte shook her head, trying to steady herself. "He's just scared. Maybe he remembers the fall. Horses don't forget that stuff." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe he remembers something else." That night, Charlotte's dreams were filled with fire and panic. She saw Winston as a young colt, trapped in a burning barn, smoke curling around his legs. She heard men shouting, the crackle of flames, the bitter sting of fear. Then she saw her father, his face hidden by smoke, whispering something to Winston, reaching out as if to save him. Charlotte jolted awake, heart pounding, sweat soaking her sheets. It was just a dream, wasn't it? But the feeling lingered. There was a connection between Winston's pain and her father's secrets, something older and deeper than she'd ever understood. The next morning, Charlotte found her mother at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. Karen looked tired, drawn, as if she hadn't slept at all. "Mom," Charlotte said quietly, "did Dad ever talk about Project Ashmore?" Her mother flinched, spilling coffee on the table. "Where did you hear that name?" "I found his journal," Charlotte admitted. "He wrote about Winston, about secrets." Karen's face closed off in an instant, walls snapping up. "Your father was obsessed with that old estate. He thought he could change the world through horses. It's nothing you need to worry about." Charlotte wanted to push, to demand answers. But something in her mother's voice warned her off. Instead, she slipped outside, journal tucked under her arm, determination hardening in her gut. Later that day, Lucas met her at the park. They sat on the swings, the journal balanced between them. Lucas thumbed through the pages, frowning at the cryptic notes. "He mentions Winston everywhere," Lucas said. "And look here, memory transfer, trauma bonding, Ashmore protocol. What does any of this mean?" Charlotte shook her head. "I don't know. But I'm starting to think my dad was trying to protect Winston from something bigger than just a bad fall." As the sun dipped below the horizon, a cold wind picked up, whispering through the trees. Lucas looked at Charlotte, worry creasing his brow. "Whatever your dad was involved in, maybe it's not finished. Maybe that's why Winston's acting so strange." Charlotte shivered, clutching the journal to her chest. In her heart, she felt the truth settling like a stone. Whatever had haunted her father, whatever was buried at Ashmore, was reaching for her now, and she would have to face it, no matter what it cost. The days after Charlotte's fall blurred together, gentle, quiet, and slow. Her body still ached, every bruise and scrape a reminder of how close she'd come to disaster in that arena. Yet the greater hurt was inside, an ache for her father, for Winston's peace, for the life she used to know before secrets began to spill from every shadow. Charlotte's mother declared a hard pause on all riding. "You need time," Karen insisted, her voice both stern and trembling. "Let yourself heal. Please." There was no arguing. Charlotte barely had the strength. The championship ribbons still hung above her desk, but she barely glanced at them now. She spent her afternoons curled in the sun by the window, journal in her lap, Winston visible from afar in the pasture. At first, the barn felt haunted. Charlotte could feel the weight of the fall, the cold echo of fear in the corners where her father used to hum as he brushed Winston down. But Winston was different, calmer than before, as if he sensed that Charlotte needed gentleness above all else. He waited for her at the fence line, never far, his breath fogging the cool morning air. Sometimes Charlotte sat with him for hours, her hand resting on his shoulder, the world outside the barn forgotten. Lucas Avery became a near constant presence, showing up after school or on weekends, always with a new story or theory. He'd taken a real interest in Winston, watching the horse with a wary curiosity, like he was waiting for the animal to speak. But mostly he was there for Charlotte, offering quiet company. "Your mom's right," Lucas told her one afternoon, as they sat on the porch, sipping lemonade. "You need to get better first. But what about Winston? Have you noticed anything else weird?" Charlotte nodded. "He has nightmares, kicks in his sleep, wakes up sweating. I hear him sometimes, calling for—" She paused. "Calling for my dad, I think. Or for me." Lucas chewed his lip, glancing at the worn journal between them. "Do you think your dad really believed Winston was special?" Charlotte traced her father's initials on the leather cover. "Dad said horses remember, but sometimes I feel like Winston remembers more than he should. Things I never told him. Fears I never spoke out loud. When I'm sad, he gets tense. When I'm angry, he paces." Lucas leaned forward. "That's not normal, Char. I mean, horses are smart, but this is something else. Maybe it's that project, Ashmore." They sat in silence, letting the warm wind rattle the pages of the journal. The entries made little sense, but certain phrases stuck with Charlotte. Emotional resonance, echoes of trauma, bonding protocol. Sometimes she wondered if the words were written for her or for Winston. The next few weeks became a slow rhythm of healing. Charlotte started light exercises, stretching sore muscles and relearning her own body's limits. She visited Winston every day, not to ride, but to be near him. At first, she brushed him carefully, singing under her breath the way her father once did. Winston responded by relaxing, even nuzzling her cheek with his soft muzzle. Little by little, Charlotte felt her old confidence return, not in the saddle but in the quiet trust that passed between her and her horse. Her mother watched from a distance, face troubled. One evening, as Charlotte led Winston through gentle groundwork in the paddock, Karen approached with hesitant steps. "I used to watch your father do that," Karen said, her voice soft. "He said Winston was the calmest when you were near." Charlotte kept her gaze on Winston, but her heart thudded. Why did Dad write about Ashmore? Why did he call Winston the key? Karen closed her eyes, breathing deep. "Your father. He believed in things I didn't. That animals, especially Winston, could feel what we hide, even from ourselves. Ashmore was supposed to be a research project, but it turned into something else. Something he regretted." Charlotte's throat tightened. Did it have anything to do with his death? Karen's eyes glistened. I wish I could say no, but some secrets are heavier than we realize. Before Charlotte could ask more, Karen squeezed her shoulder and retreated to the house, leaving Charlotte alone with the golden dusk and Winston's steady presence. Lucas arrived later that night, carrying a thermos of cocoa and a notepad covered in scribbles. "I did some digging," he announced, "on Ashmore. It was a private estate, burned down a few years ago. But there are rumors. Animal testing, emotional memory stuff. Weird, right?" Charlotte shivered, but Lucas's energy was infectious. Together they pored over the journal, looking for clues, old dates, strange symbols, references to the protocol. Sometimes, Lucas made jokes to lighten the mood, teasing her about the horse whisperer gene. But Charlotte knew he believed her, maybe more than anyone else. As days slipped into weeks, Charlotte and Lucas grew closer. They shared stories. Lucas about his old school, his father's job that kept them moving, his secret hope to stay in one place for once. Charlotte about her father's old barn tales, the first time she'd ridden Winston alone, the night of the fire in her dreams. One afternoon, rain drumming against the barn roof, Charlotte pressed her cheek to Winston's neck, feeling his warmth and the steady drum of his heart. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to find the truth, boy," she whispered. Winston breathed out a soft, steady sound, as if to say, "You are." Lucas, standing nearby, watched the pair with a thoughtful frown. "You ever get the feeling," he said, "that Winston's trying to tell us something? Not just with his body, but more?" Charlotte nodded. Every day. They decided to take things slow. No riding until Charlotte was fully recovered. No rash adventures. Instead, they focused on Winston's healing, too. Lucas brought treats and books on horse psychology. Charlotte started gentle liberty work, letting Winston move at his own pace. Something shifted in those quiet weeks. A kind of peace settled over the farm. Charlotte's mother smiled more, joining them sometimes to brush Winston or just sit on the fence and watch. For the first time since her father's death, Charlotte felt the splintered pieces of her family knitting together, if only a little. But late at night, when the world was quiet, Charlotte sometimes heard Winston's restless whinnies, his hooves stomping in the dark, and wondered what ghosts they'd both need to face before they could truly heal. Spring came slowly to Lancaster County that year. Crocuses poked through the thawing earth, and the chill in the air faded, replaced by the first warmth of the season. The championship felt far away, almost like it had happened in another life. But the questions it raised hovered in Charlotte's mind with stubborn persistence. Charlotte spent her mornings with Winston, practicing simple groundwork, sometimes talking to him the way she once talked to her father. She swore Winston understood, responding with flicks of his ears, nudges, and soft grunts as she poured her worries into the air. But some questions, especially those about her father's past and Project Ashmore, lingered, unanswered and heavy. One afternoon, Lucas arrived with a determined look and a folder bulging with clippings and notes. He had been digging online and at the local library, gathering anything he could find about Ashmore and the Morgans. He laid out the evidence on the barn's workbench, faded photographs of the Ashmore estate before it burned, old newspaper articles about groundbreaking animal cognition research, a list of names that included Dr. Robert Morgan, Charlotte's father. One headline stood out in bold type: "Local equestrian scientist launches emotional memory project." Lucas tapped the article. "Your dad really was a pioneer, Char. But there's barely anything about what actually happened at Ashmore. It's all speculation, rumors, and, well, cover-ups, if you ask me." Charlotte's heart twisted. Mom said Dad regretted getting involved, that it changed him. Lucas nodded, pushing the journal closer. Maybe we can figure out why. Look, he keeps mentioning protocol failures and bond anomalies. Whatever went on, it seems like Winston was at the center of it. A quiet fell between them as Charlotte traced her father's notes, feeling the weight of secrets that had haunted her family for years. She flipped to the back of the journal and found a sketch, a map drawn in pencil, of the Ashmore estate. In the corner, her father had scribbled, "Truth waits in the ashes." Charlotte swallowed hard. I want to see it, the ruins. Maybe there's something there he wanted us to find. Lucas hesitated. Your mom would kill us. She doesn't have to know. But before they could make any plans, Charlotte's mother called her in for dinner. The table was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that made the walls feel closer. After dinner, as Charlotte helped clear the plates, she mustered the courage to ask, "Mom, do you ever miss Dad's old friends from Ashmore?" Karen paused, her hands deep in sudsy water. Some of them, yes. Others, I wish I'd never met. Charlotte took a breath. What really happened there? Karen dried her hands and leaned against the counter. For the first time in months, she looked less like the stoic doctor and more like a woman who had lost someone she loved. Your father thought he could heal the world's wounds through animals. He believed horses could teach us how to be better people, how to feel what others feel. The research was promising, but emotions aren't simple, Char. When you dig too deep, sometimes you bring up things you can't put back. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. Was Winston hurt? Karen nodded, eyes shining. He was the youngest, the smartest, and the most sensitive. The things your father did were meant to help, but I think Winston carried more than he should have. That's why your father brought him home, away from the project, away from everything. They stood in the kitchen, a quiet understanding settling between them. Karen reached for Charlotte's hand, her grip warm and firm. Whatever your father was searching for, don't let it take you too. That night, Charlotte lay awake, the journal open on her lap, her mother's words echoing in her head. Was she chasing answers or running from the truth? She drifted to sleep with Winston's photograph in her hand. Her dreams were full of broken images, a horse running through fire, her father's shadowy figure at the edge of the woods, a locked door and a whisper. Not everything can be fixed, Char. The next morning dawned with a stubborn fog. Charlotte found Lucas waiting at the fence, a thermos of coffee in his hand. You still want to do this? He asked. She nodded. If my father left something for us to find, I need to see it for myself. They set off after chores, biking through the back roads until the ground turned rough and the trees grew thick. The Ashmore estate loomed ahead, half swallowed by vines and memories. The main building was little more than scorched beams and shattered glass. The old stables just a charred outline against the gray sky. They crept through the ruins, careful not to disturb the ash. Inside the remnants of the stable, Charlotte found a rusted nameplate. Winston. She ran her fingers over it, feeling a jolt of recognition. Lucas poked through debris, uncovering scorched notebooks, a burned clipboard with barely legible names, and tucked deep in a wall cavity, a small brass key, tarnished but whole. Charlotte's breath caught. Dad's journal, he said to look for a key. She took the key in trembling hands, heart pounding. Suddenly the air felt thick, charged with something electric. In the silence, she swore she heard hoofbeats, just a trick of the wind, or maybe the ghosts of all the horses who'd passed through this place. They hurried home muddy and breathless, hiding the key and their discoveries before Charlotte's mom could see. That night, Charlotte used the brass key to unlock the clasp on her father's journal. Inside, the last pages fell open. Notes scrawled in frantic handwriting, sketches of Winston, a warning. Emotions linger. If you push a horse too far, he'll carry your wounds with his own. Only truth brings healing. Charlotte's hands shook as she traced the words. She glanced at Winston, watching her from the paddock, peaceful at last. For the first time, she understood. Her father's secrets weren't just about research. They were about guilt, about love, about learning when to let go. In the days that followed, Charlotte spent more time with her mother, helping in the kitchen, sitting together on the porch, talking about small things. The past felt a little less heavy with every honest conversation. Winston seemed calmer too, responding to the quiet warmth that was returning to the Morgan house. But Charlotte knew the journey wasn't over. She still had questions, and the ruins of Ashmore had not given up all their secrets. With Lucas and Winston by her side, she was ready to face whatever truth waited in the ashes. Charlotte could hardly sleep after unlocking her father's final notes. The warnings echoed in her mind. Emotions linger. Only truth brings healing. Each word felt heavier after their trip to Ashmore. Every time Charlotte closed her eyes, she saw the burned stables, the blackened beams, the nameplate that had once marked Winston's home before he'd come into her life. Lucas texted her non-stop, convinced there was more to find. "We missed something," he insisted. "What if there's a hidden room or records left behind?" Charlotte wanted to believe they'd discovered everything important, but her father's cryptic sketches hinted otherwise. The secret, she sensed, was bigger than a box of old papers. One night, under a sliver of moon and a rising wind, Charlotte slipped out to the barn. Winston was restless, pawing at the dirt, tossing his head at invisible ghosts. His agitation had grown worse every night since their trip to Ashmore. He snapped at the air, his coat slick with sweat even in the cool night. When Charlotte touched him, he trembled. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "It's just me." He calmed for a moment, then let out a sharp, haunted whinny that cut through the quiet farm. Charlotte shivered. She felt it too, the sense of being watched, of secrets pressing in all around her. She made a decision. She and Lucas would return to Ashmore for answers and for Winston's sake. Maybe, she thought, if they uncovered the truth, it would finally let them and Winston rest. The next afternoon, Lucas was already waiting when Charlotte finished chores. "We gotta go before it rains," he said, nodding to the steel-gray clouds gathering over the horizon. They set off on bikes again, cutting through fields and overgrown trails until the ruined estate came into view. The burnt skeletons of the stables looked even more forbidding in the stormy light. They ducked through a gap in the fence, nerves tight. Inside, the air felt charged, every shadow sharper, every sound amplified by their own pounding hearts. Charlotte led Lucas to where she'd found the key, searching for anything she'd missed. Lucas tugged at boards, shining his flashlight into cracks. Then a noise, footsteps, not their own. They froze, breath caught. From the far side of the barn, a shadow moved. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped out of the gloom. His face was hidden beneath a battered hat. He gripped a flashlight and what looked like an old security baton. "What are you kids doing here?" The man's voice was rough, edged with anger. Charlotte's heart leapt into her throat. Lucas stammered, We're just looking around. It's abandoned?" The man advanced, boots crunching on broken glass. "Get out," Now! This place isn't safe, especially not for nosy kids. Charlotte squared her shoulders. My father worked here, Robert Morgan. I have a right to know what happened. The man's jaw tightened. Robert was a good man, but some things are better left buried. Lucas tugged Charlotte's sleeve. Let's go. They turned to leave, but not before Charlotte caught a glimpse of the name stitched onto the man's jacket. Finch. She'd seen it before in her father's notes. Harold Finch, one of the original Ashmore researchers. As they raced back to their bikes, thunder rolled in the distance. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the woods, breathless and shaken. What was that? Lucas gasped, eyes wide. Harold Finch, Charlotte replied, voice shaking. He's hiding something. Something about Winston, about all of this. Back home, Charlotte's mother was waiting, arms folded, face tight with worry and anger. You went back there, didn't you? Karen's voice quivered between fury and fear. Charlotte didn't flinch. I had to, Mom. Winston's getting worse. I need to know what happened to him. Karen's shoulders sagged, defeated. That place is dangerous. There are people who don't want the truth out. Charlotte pressed on. You always told me to face my fears. I can't help Winston if I don't understand. Karen sat down hard at the kitchen table, tears shining in her eyes. I lost your father to those secrets, Charlotte. I can't lose you, too. The fight drained out of Charlotte. She wrapped her arms around her mom, and for a moment neither spoke. The storm outside rattled the windows. Winston's cries echoed faintly across the fields. The days that followed were tense. Karen hovered, refusing to let Charlotte out of her sight. Lucas texted constantly, pushing her to meet in secret and piece together what they'd learned. Every night, Winston's agitation grew, kicking at the stall, biting at his blanket, eyes wild with a fear Charlotte couldn't soothe. His distress began to affect the other horses, too. They paced, restless, as if Winston's unease was contagious. One evening, Charlotte stayed late in the barn, determined to comfort Winston. As she stroked his neck, he suddenly reared up, eyes rolling white, a high-pitched scream tearing from his throat. Winston, she cried. He crashed down, barely missing her, hooves striking the stall. Charlotte stumbled back, heart hammering, as her mother and Lucas rushed in. Karen pulled her back. That's enough. He's not safe. Neither are you. But Charlotte refused to leave. She pressed her forehead to Winston's mane, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not giving up on you. Lucas watched, troubled. We need help, real help, someone who knows what happened at Ashmore. Karen, eyes rimmed red, nodded at last. Fine. But if we do this, we do it together. That night, Charlotte sat by Winston's stall until the storm passed, the three of them silent, bound by fear and love. As lightning lit the sky, Charlotte made a vow, no matter what it cost, she would uncover the truth and free Winston from the ghosts of Ashmore. What she didn't know was that the real danger, the force that had haunted her father, Winston, and the entire project, was drawing closer, ready to test her courage and her heart in ways she could never imagine. A restless hush settled over the Morgan farm after the confrontation at Ashmore. The family tiptoed through each day, the weight of unspoken words hanging thick between them. Even the animals seemed to sense it. Horses paced their stalls, dogs whined at closed doors, and Winston's restless cries echoed through the night, waking Charlotte from shallow, haunted sleep. Charlotte's mother, Karen, tried to restore normalcy. She made hot breakfasts, kept the TV low, and filled the silence with weather reports and gentle reminders about homework. But Charlotte could see the worry etched in every line of her face, the way she glanced out the window as if expecting the past to come knocking. Winston's condition only worsened. He paced and stomped, sides slick with sweat. He'd shudder at every unexpected sound, eyes rolling, ears pinned back. Charlotte spent hours by his stall, singing the old lullabies her father once hummed, but nothing seemed to bring him peace. One evening, after another sleepless night filled with Winston's frantic screams, Charlotte found herself at her wits' end. She stumbled into the kitchen, clutching her father's journal and the brass key, her eyes gritty with exhaustion. Karen sat at the table, hands wrapped tight around a chipped mug. Charlotte dropped the journal onto the wood. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. I need to know what really happened to Dad, to Winston. You have to tell me. No more secrets, no more lies." Karen's shoulders sagged, and she looked smaller than Charlotte had ever seen her. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a trembling breath, she started. "Your father wasn't just a trainer, Char. He was a pioneer. He wanted to understand how animals, how Winston, could connect with people's emotions, even carry our pain. Project Ashmore started with good intentions. They studied how horses reacted to humans, how trauma could be transferred, healed, but it got out of hand." She closed her eyes, voice thick with regret. The other researchers, Finch, the board, wanted results, faster, bigger. Your father tried to stop them. He saw that Winston was suffering, absorbing the fear and sadness of every test, every subject. He tried to pull Winston out. That's when the accident happened. Charlotte's heart pounded. "You mean his death wasn't just an accident?" Karen's lips trembled. "I don't know for sure. All I know is he was scared. He left the project, brought Winston home, but the damage was done. Winston was never the same. And now, neither are we." Charlotte reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. For the first time, she saw the raw grief, the guilt, the loneliness that had lived inside Karen since that terrible day. "I'm not mad, Mom. I just want to help Winston. I want to help you, too." They sat together until dawn, holding hands, sharing stories, finally breaking the cycle of silence that had kept them apart. But Winston's suffering didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Each night he relived memories that didn't belong to him. Memories of fire, of voices yelling, of cold hands and syringes. The barn shook with his stomping, his desperate, echoing cries. Sometimes, Charlotte would find him pressed against the stall door, sides heaving, as if trying to escape a nightmare no one else could see. Lucas came by every day, offering quiet support. He helped repair the barn after Winston's fits, fetched fresh hay, and scoured the internet for any mention of Project Ashmore or Harold Finch. One night, as they sat by the paddock under a starless sky, Lucas turned to Charlotte, his voice low. "We can't go on like this. You can't go on like this. Maybe we need to go back, to Ashmore, to Finch, get the truth out of him. Or maybe someone else knows how to help Winston." Charlotte considered it. The idea of returning to that haunted place filled her with dread, but every instinct told her it was the only way. She glanced at Winston, who stood by the fence, silhouetted against the night. His head hung low, his breath steaming in the cold air. That evening, Karen found Charlotte in the barn, curled up in the straw beside Winston, her face streaked with tears. "Sometimes I wonder if Dad's ghost is here too," Charlotte murmured. "Or if Winston is carrying all of it, his pain, his memories, mine. Karen knelt beside her, brushing hair from Charlotte's forehead. Your father believed in healing, but he forgot that sometimes the only way to heal is to face what hurts, to let go. Charlotte nodded, wiping her eyes. She stood, straightened her shoulders. I have to do it, Mom. For Winston, for Dad, for all of us. Karen nodded, pride and fear warring in her eyes. I'll help you. We'll do this together. That night, Winston's cries woke the whole household. He thrashed in his stall, eyes wild, reliving horrors no horse should know. Charlotte, Karen, and Lucas ran to the barn. Charlotte threw open the stall and rushed in, arms wide. I'm here! Winston! I'm here! Winston froze, nostrils flaring, sweat streaming down his sides. He let out a ragged breath, then collapsed to his knees. Charlotte knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his massive neck, whispering softly. Lucas watched, awe and fear mingling in his gaze. He needs you, Char. But you need to let him go, too. He's not just your dad's legacy. He's his own. Charlotte understood. She pressed her forehead to Winston's. Tomorrow, she whispered, we break the cycle. We set you free. As dawn broke over the fields, Charlotte felt something shift inside her. A spark of courage, of resolve. The time for running was over. The time for truth, for healing, had come. Thunder rolled low and heavy as Charlotte lay awake, listening to Winston's ragged breathing drifting through the open window. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper his name, and with every flash of lightning, her heart raced with both dread and determination. She'd made a promise, to Winston, to her father's memory, and to herself. The time for answers had finally come. By midnight, the storm had fully arrived. Rain battering the farmhouse roof in waves. Charlotte couldn't sleep. Neither could her mother nor Lucas, who'd insisted on staying over just in case. Every now and then, Winston's anguished whinnies cut through the storm like a plea for help. When a particularly sharp cry tore through the darkness, Charlotte shot upright. Winston's distress was sharper than ever before. Lightning briefly illuminated the barn. Winston was rearing, nostrils flared, hooves slamming against the stall. Then, as if some invisible force had snapped, the latch gave way, and Winston bolted into the night. "Winston!" Charlotte shouted, not even pausing to grab her raincoat. Lucas and Karen followed, flashlights in hand, as Charlotte sprinted barefoot through the mud and rain. Winston galloped toward the woods, mane wild, eyes wide with terror and a strange kind of purpose. He moved like he was being called, by memory, by fear, by something ancient and unfinished. The three of them gave chase, rain soaking them to the bone. Charlotte's lungs burned as she pushed through brambles, her heart pounding. She could just make out Winston's shape ahead, illuminated by the occasional fork of lightning, always moving, always heading deeper toward the ruins of Ashmore. When they reached the crumbling estate, the storm seemed to pause, thunder fading, rain slowing to a mist. Winston stood in the middle of the old courtyard, head bowed, shivering but resolute. At the far end of the yard, beneath the remains of an old awning, stood a solitary figure, Harold Finch, as if he'd been waiting for them all along. Charlotte's breath caught. She approached, shielding her eyes from the flashlight's glare. Finch's face was haggard, older than she remembered, shadows under his eyes like bruises. "You shouldn't be here," he called, voice raw. "This place, these memories, they're poison, girl." Lucas bristled. "Tell her the truth, about the project, about Winston, about her dad." Finch shook his head, pain flashing across his features. "Your father was the best of us. He believed healing was possible. that horses could shoulder our pain, that love could outweigh trauma. But the project went too far. Winston. Winston became the vessel. Every subject's grief, every researcher's regret, all poured into him. Your father saw what we were doing and tried to stop it. Karen stepped forward, trembling. He died for that, didn't he? Finch's voice broke. He tried to shut it down. The board wanted to silence him. His death was no accident. Charlotte felt her knees buckle. The world spun, but Lucas steadied her. She looked at Winston, who stood frozen in the rain, eyes glassy with old, inherited sorrow. Finch spoke again, his voice low. Winston carries the pain of generations. He remembers every touch, every fear, every hope. He was supposed to be our salvation. Instead, he became our burden. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the haunted ruins and the lines of grief etched on every face. Charlotte stepped toward Winston, her heart shattering at the sight of him so broken, so tired. She pressed her hand to his trembling neck and spoke, voice shaking but strong. I'm sorry, Winston. I'm so sorry for everything we did to you. For every secret, every experiment, every memory you never asked for. Winston shuddered, then bent his head until his forehead touched Charlotte's chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her face, feeling a rush of grief that was hers, and yet somehow larger, shared with every soul that had come before. Karen knelt beside her daughter, her own tears falling freely. You're free now, Winston. We release you. You don't have to carry this pain any longer. Finch, trembling, whispered, Forgive us. All of us. For a moment, the air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, something unspoken passing between them all. Then Winston let out a deep, trembling sigh, and for the first time in weeks, relaxed. His body lost its tension. His breath steadied. The storm faded to a gentle drizzle, moonlight filtering through the broken roof. Winston stepped forward, calmer, and nuzzled Charlotte's cheek. Lucas, eyes wet, placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. It's over, Char. He's free. They lingered in the ruins, holding one another, hearts pounding as they let go of the legacy that had haunted them all. Charlotte gazed at the ashes and knew at last that she had confronted her family's greatest secret. Not with anger or fear, but with truth and love. As they made their way back through the woods, Winston walking easily at Charlotte's side, she felt lighter than she had in years. Her mother squeezed her hand, pride and relief mingling in her tired smile. The night that began with fear and flight ended with hope and healing, a new chapter waiting to be written. The day after the storm, dawn broke gentle and gold over the Morgan farm, as if the world itself was offering a clean slate. The air was soft, the land washed fresh by rain, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Charlotte slept through the night without waking to Winston's cries. She rose slowly, body sore from the chase and the cold, but her heart felt unexpectedly light. Charlotte found Winston already grazing in the morning mist, his coat sleek, eyes clear. He raised his head when he saw her, but there was no fear in him now, only the quiet contentment of a horse at peace. Charlotte pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "We did it, boy. You're free." The days that followed were unlike any Charlotte could remember. Winston was a changed horse, relaxed, affectionate, eager to nuzzle her pockets for treats. He no longer startled at every sound or paced his stall in the dark. The transformation rippled outward. The other horses calmed. The barn felt warmer, and laughter began to creep back into the Morgan house. Karen noticed it too. One afternoon, she found Charlotte in the pasture, reading out loud from her father's journal. Karen settled onto the fence rail beside her, arms folded against the breeze. "I wish I'd been braver," Karen admitted. "Your dad saw things I was too afraid to face. I thought hiding from the past would keep us safe, but it just kept us stuck." Charlotte put down the journal and took her mother's hand. "We're not stuck anymore. We faced it, together." They sat in companionable silence, watching Winston nibble clover, his tail swishing in the sunlight. For the first time since Robert Morgan's death, mother and daughter felt like a team, grieving, but finally moving forward. The change didn't stop at home. Word of what happened at Ashmore and Winston's miraculous recovery spread quickly through the town. Neighbors who once whispered about the troubled Morgan family now brought pies, offered help in the fields, and asked Charlotte about Winston's special gifts. The local paper ran a feature on Charlotte, calling her the girl who healed a haunted horse. At first, Charlotte blushed at the attention, but soon she realized how many people needed to hear her story. People who had lost loved ones, who struggled with grief, who carried their own invisible burdens. It was Lucas who suggested the next step. "We should start something," he said one evening as they walked the fence line, Winston following lazily behind. "Like a club or a workshop. Teach people what you learned with Winston, about feelings, about listening, about forgiveness." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Horse therapy?" Lucas grinned. "Why not? You and Winston could help a lot of people." It felt right. With her mother's blessing, Charlotte reached out to the local community center. Together, she and Lucas drafted a program. Saturday mornings at the Morgan farm. Free sessions for anyone struggling with sadness, anger, or loss. Winston would be the star, his story a living lesson in empathy and second chances. The first Saturday, a small group gathered in the barn. Kids from school, adults Charlotte barely knew, even a retired veteran who limped as he led a skittish pony. Charlotte stood at the front, nerves jangling, but Winston was calm as a stone. She told their story, not as a fairy tale, but as truth. About pain, about mistakes, about the power of not giving up. She described Winston's journey from fear and rage to trust and healing, and how facing the truth together was the only thing that set them free. Then she invited the group to meet Winston. He greeted each person gently, nuzzling hands and sniffing pockets. A few people wept openly. Others laughed in surprise as Winston let them stroke his soft nose or lean against his sturdy shoulder. Even the most withdrawn children seemed to relax in his presence. Over the weeks, the group grew. Some came just to watch. Others stayed to muck stalls, share stories, or walk with Winston through the fields. Charlotte and Lucas introduced simple activities: brushing, leading, learning to notice how horses reflected their own moods. The lessons were simple but powerful. Be present, be patient, forgive yourself, and listen with your whole heart. The effect on the community was striking. People who rarely spoke to one another now shared coffee on the Morgan porch, swapped worries and jokes, and began to support each other through the rough patches. For the first time, Charlotte understood what her father had truly wanted, not just to study emotions, but to help people heal together. One afternoon, after a particularly joyful session, Charlotte found her mother in the kitchen, humming as she washed dishes. Karen looked up, smiling in a way Charlotte hadn't seen in years. "Your dad would be proud of you," Karen said softly. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were happy ones. "I hope so, Mom. I really do." Karen dried her hands and pulled Charlotte into a hug. He'd want you to keep going, and I do too. As summer deepened, Charlotte, Lucas, and Karen continued the workshops. Winston always at the center. Calm, strong, a living reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, truth, and love. Their story spread beyond the county, drawing visitors and letters from strangers who saw hope in Winston's transformation. One evening, as Charlotte walked Winston under a sky lit with fireflies, she whispered, "Thank you for carrying me through, for letting me carry you." Winston snorted, gently bumping her with his nose, and Charlotte laughed, a bright, unburdened sound that soared out across the fields. The legacy of pain had been replaced by a new legacy, one of forgiveness, compassion, and a family, both human and horse, finally at peace. By the time the leaves began turning gold on the maples and the mornings carried the first hint of autumn, Charlotte felt as though her whole world had shifted. There was peace on the Morgan farm, but also something new, a sense of purpose that reached far beyond the boundaries of their own fields. The horse therapy sessions had grown into something much larger than Charlotte ever imagined. What began as a handful of curious neighbors soon attracted parents, teachers, veterans, counselors, even city folks who'd heard about Winston's story through word of mouth or a news segment on local TV. Each weekend, a new group arrived, some anxious, some skeptical, all carrying their own hidden griefs and silent hopes. Charlotte worked with Lucas to organize the gatherings, but what mattered most was Winston. He was always at the heart of it, gentle and patient, his calm presence somehow making space for everyone to let down their guard. Charlotte would introduce herself, share a little of Winston's story, never shying away from the hard parts. She spoke openly about the loss of her father, the buried secrets, the way Winston had mirrored her own pain until they both learned to let go. People listened, some nodding, others crying quietly. Afterward, she'd invite everyone to take a turn with Winston, brushing his coat, walking alongside him, just sitting with him in silence. No one was ever rushed, and there was no pressure to share, but often people found their own words as they worked. One Saturday morning, Charlotte was invited to speak at her high school's assembly. She stood at the microphone, scanning the crowded gym, her classmates, teachers, and the principal waiting expectantly. Her hands trembled, but she drew a deep breath and began. "I used to think that being strong meant hiding your pain," she said. "After my dad died, I tried to pretend everything was okay. But Winston, my horse, taught me something different. He showed me that pain doesn't just go away. If you bury it, it grows. And sometimes you hurt others without meaning to." She looked down, seeing Lucas give her a thumbs up from the bleachers. "My family kept secrets. We thought we were protecting each other, but all we did was make things worse. It wasn't until we started telling the truth about what happened at Ashmore, about my dad, about ourselves, that we started to heal. Winston carried our pain until he almost broke. We were the same, but when we faced it together, everything changed." Charlotte paused, meeting the eyes of a girl who'd lost her brother the year before. We all have something we're carrying: grief, guilt, fear. Sometimes we try to fix it by ourselves, but the only way out is through. And the only way through is with help. From friends, family, sometimes even from animals who love us without judgment. Her voice was steady now, the gym utterly silent. If you're hurting, tell someone. If you see someone hurting, reach out. Don't let secrets keep you trapped. The world is full of people and horses who want to help you heal. When she finished, The gym erupted in applause, but Charlotte didn't feel triumphant. She felt relieved, lighter, as if sharing her story had released something she'd been holding for years. Later, a boy from her class approached her in the hallway, eyes red. "Thanks for saying all that," he mumbled. "My dad's in rehab. I never talk about it, but it helped, hearing you." Charlotte smiled, squeezing his arm. "You're not alone. None of us are." Word spread quickly. The local news asked Charlotte and her mother to give a talk at the library. Dr. Karen Morgan, once so private, stood proudly beside her daughter. She spoke about the ethical care of animals, about the mistakes of Ashmore, and about emotional resilience. Not just for horses, but for everyone. "Animals feel what we feel," Karen explained to the gathered crowd. "They reflect our moods, magnify our worries, sometimes even carry our pain. But with kindness, patience, and honesty, we can heal together." That's the real lesson. What we do to others, we do to ourselves. Charlotte watched her mother with awe, seeing how grief could transform into wisdom, how shame could be replaced by pride and purpose. The workshops at the Morgan farm expanded. Charlotte, Lucas, and Karen began offering evening sessions for teens who struggled with anxiety and depression, for veterans living with trauma, and for families learning to talk to each other again. Each time, Winston was there. Quiet, steadfast, his gentle eyes never judging, his presence always calming. One late summer evening, after a session, Lucas and Charlotte sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching fireflies flicker over the paddocks. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Lucas asked. "If you hadn't found that journal? If Winston hadn't come back for you at the championship?" Charlotte nodded. "All the time. Sometimes I wish things had been easier. But then, maybe we wouldn't be here. Maybe Winston would still be suffering. Maybe we would too." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it's over? The legacy?" Charlotte smiled, thoughtful. "I don't think it ever really ends. But I think we're writing a new chapter. One where we help each other, instead of hiding." A hush fell between them, comfortable and warm. The next weekend, Dr. Karen Morgan led a special workshop for local veterinarians and animal trainers. She shared everything she and Charlotte had learned about trauma, empathy, and ethical animal care. Winston demonstrated his exercises, responding to the lightest touch, teaching through example that trust was built slowly, with patience and love. In the quiet moments after the last car left, Charlotte leaned against Winston, feeling the powerful heartbeat that had carried them through so much. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me what courage really is." She understood now. Courage wasn't about never falling, never being afraid, or never making mistakes. It was about showing up, speaking the truth, and being willing to heal, even when it hurt. That was Winston's greatest lesson, and now it was hers too. Years passed, as quietly as dew dries from morning grass. Seasons slipped by, and the Morgan farm grew into something far greater than Charlotte, or her father, had ever dreamed. The story of Winston and Charlotte became part of local legend, then grew beyond, inspiring others in ways no one could have predicted. Now 19, Charlotte stood at the fence in the soft light of early evening, the sky streaked pink and violet above rows of new paddocks. She watched as a pair of younger riders, kids from the Saturday therapy group, led their horses in gentle circles, laughter echoing across the fields. Beside her, Winston grazed, silver now threading his dark mane, but his eyes still bright, still wise. They called it Legacy Stables. The name was Karen's idea, chosen to honor not just Robert Morgan's memory, but everything they had learned about healing and hope. What started as informal therapy sessions had become a full program: after-school lessons, equine-assisted counseling, weekend retreats for families struggling with loss or trauma. The barn bustled with new faces, some nervous, some excited, all looking for connection. Charlotte wore many hats now: mentor, teacher, big sister, friend. The girls she guided through their first lessons reminded her so much of herself: hesitant, hopeful, hungry for a sense of belonging. She saw herself in the way they leaned in to whisper secrets to their horses, in the shy pride of mastering a new skill, in the tears that sometimes came without warning. Winston was at the center of it all, beloved by the entire community, his story a living symbol of courage and second chances. One afternoon, Charlotte walked the property with Lucas, who had stayed in town for college and now helped run the stables on weekends. They stopped by the old training ring, where a group of teens, some of whom had arrived years ago, angry and silent, were now coaching newcomers in the basics of groundwork. "It's weird," Lucas said, nudging Charlotte with his shoulder, "seeing how much everything's changed. Feels like yesterday we were sneaking through Ashmore, scared out of our minds." Charlotte laughed. "We were out of our minds. But I'm glad we didn't give up, even when it was terrifying." Lucas watched a new student gently pat Winston's shoulder. "Think your dad would be proud?" Charlotte's smile softened. "Yeah, I think he'd be proud of all of us, even of Winston, especially Winston." Their conversation was interrupted by a boy calling for help. A Mustang gelding, new to the farm and still skittish, had slipped its lid. Charlotte responded instinctively, moving with calm confidence as she helped guide the animal back. She spoke softly, hands steady, never forcing. The boy watched in awe, then grinned as the horse settled at her touch. "You're magic," he whispered. Charlotte shook her head. "No, just patient. Horses teach us that if we listen, and if we're honest, trust follows." Later, as dusk crept in, Charlotte sat with Winston under the old sycamore at the edge of the property. The years showed in his gentle gray, but he was peaceful, content. Children from the therapy group had woven flowers into his mane. He wore them like a crown. Charlotte traced the faded scar on his neck, a reminder of old pain and all they had overcome together. She rested her head against his and closed her eyes, letting memories wash over her. The fall at the championship, her father's cryptic journal, the haunting at Ashmore, the night of the storm when everything changed. She felt gratitude, not just for the happy moments, but for the pain, too, and for the courage that grew from it. She thought of all the families who had come through their doors, all the wounds that began to heal in the presence of Winston's patience and her family's love. Karen emerged from the barn, arms full of tack and saddle soap, smiling with an ease that would have been unimaginable years before. She had become the farm's second heart, welcoming every child and parent with warmth. Sometimes, after a tough session, she'd remind Charlotte, "Healing is messy. Don't expect a straight line." And they'd both laugh, knowing it was true. At the year's end, the community gathered at Legacy Stables for a celebration. There were speeches, food, and a slideshow of photos, children hugging Winston, teens grinning atop their first bareback ride, families crying and laughing together. When it was her turn to speak, Charlotte stood before the crowd, her heart full. Winston stood behind her, his presence as steady as ever. "I used to think legacy meant winning ribbons," she began, her voice strong and sure. "Or having your name remembered for something great. But that's not it at all. Legacy is the courage to face the truth, even when it hurts. It's forgiving, not just others, but yourself. It's the hope you pass on when you help someone else through their pain. She paused, looking at the faces of those she'd come to know and care for. If there's anything Winston taught me, it's that healing starts when we listen. To ourselves, to each other, to the quiet things, like the love in a horse's eyes, or the memory of someone we've lost. You don't have to do it alone. That's what this place is for. As the crowd cheered, Charlotte felt tears gather in her eyes, not of grief, but of pride and joy. She glanced at her mother and Lucas, at Winston with his floral crown, and knew that this was only the beginning. The work would go on, long after her story faded from the headlines. Later, as the sun set and the fields turned gold, Charlotte stood with Winston at the edge of the pasture. She whispered her final lesson, one learned over years, through pain and joy and everything in between. To heal, she said softly, we must listen. To ourselves, to the animals, to the echoes of love in every memory. That's how we build a legacy worth leaving behind. Winston nickered, as if in agreement, and together they watched the night settle gently over Legacy Stables, a place of hope, forgiveness, and stories still to come.